Hey guys. Okay, so today we're in lesson 3 of poetry, and we're going to learn about a poem today called When I Heard the Learned Astronomer. And we're going to learn about a poem that is a description of a thing or a lesson of a thing versus the actual thing itself. I know, interesting things about poetry, aren't they? So I'm just going to try using my slides this way because it seems to work better with my video. So here's our learning goals. I can identify the poetic device anaphora, say anaphora, and explain how its use affects a poem's meaning. I can use text evidence to discuss a poem. I can use the poetic device anaphora to create my own personal poem. So same pattern that we've been doing, reading a poem, learning about a poet, and writing a poem. We have some vocabulary words that can also be found in your poetry book on page 33 and 34. So you might want to go there right now so you have the parts of speech and the meanings of those words. Astronomer is a scientist who studies outer space and the bodies such as stars, moons, and planets in outer space. Figures are numbers or diagrams. So that's kind of an older word for numbers, figures. Learn your figures in school, young man. Learned is a shortened version of learned, in which the apostrophe stands for the missing letter E. So just like in a contraction, like cannot becomes can't, the apostrophe there stands for the missing letters. So this is used to describe people who have spent many years studying a subject, learned. A talk, usually given by a teacher or other expert on a single topic, is a lecture. And mystical means not of this world, mystical. And proofs are in math arguments that show an idea or a rule must be correct. So like in geometry, you'll have a proof that shows that two lines are parallel, something like that, usually in upper level geometry. Then unaccountable is something that cannot be explained, a person who does not take responsibility. So either one of those, unaccountable, person who is not accountable, doesn't take responsibility, or can't be explained, unaccountable. And then we have our literary vocabulary word. Anaphora is a repetition of words at the start of a series of lines in a poem. So repetition of words. So we're going to be looking at that today. All right. And let's get into our poem, which is called When I Heard the Learned Astronomer by Walt Whitman. When I Heard the Learned Astronomer. Here's our vocabulary. And while we're on our biography of Walt Whitman, let's talk about Walt Whitman. That is from page 35 in your book. Walt Whitman is a very famous poet from 1800s or the 19th century. So he was born May 3rd, 1819 on Long Island, New York. Walt Whitman worked as a teacher and a journalist before becoming a poet. His poetry related to people of all backgrounds and made him one of America's most well-known and beloved writers. During Whitman's time, the United States of America was divided by slavery, right? Because slavery wasn't outlawed until after the Civil War in the 1860s. So he was born near 1820, so 40 years of slavery. The Civil War inspired him to write drum taps, poetry about the war, and his experiences as a battlefield nurse. His writing was powerful. Even President Lincoln admired him. In fact, several of his poems were tributes to Abraham Lincoln. Whitman also wrote poems about nature. He died in 1892. However, his poetry and free verse style, along with his conversational tone, remain appreciated and admired as one of America's best-known poets. And we're going to be reading his poem. But before we read his poem, let's talk about this. Raise your hand if you would like to put these chemical compounds in your body. Some people might not. How about chocolate? Would you like to put chocolate in your body? Some of you would, some of you wouldn't. Well, guess what? These are the chemical compounds that describe or make up chocolate. Yes. So describing the thing itself versus the real thing. Remember, that's what I said your poems were going to be about today. So would you prefer eating chocolate, looking at a picture of chocolate, or learning about the chemical compounds that make up chocolate? Right? Okay, we have a video to watch that's going to give us some background on this topic. Hopefully, sorry about that, just me sneezing. Okay, let's watch it one more time. Okay. Let's see if we can get back to where we were. There we go. All right. Sorry about that. And what images did you see in the video? Based on the images in the video, what do you think is the topic of the poem? You can pause me and pull some sticks to answer those questions, please. Oh, right. If you said that the topic was going to be space or astronomy, you are correct. Plus the name of the poem, When I Heard the Learned Astronomer, that might have given you a clue, right? So the drawings in the video were the perception of space from the 1800s, right? Because we know that Walt Whitman wrote in the 1800s. So we're kind of taking ourselves back to that time. And in this poem, he's describing a time he attended an astronomer's lecture. So let's check it out. The numbers on the left-hand side are just the lines numbers. So they're not in the original poem, but they're there to help us to discuss it more. When I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I sitting heard the astronomer, where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room. Okay, that's just the beginning of the poem. If you're looking at the poem on page 27, that's just the first half of the poem. And let's just talk about the first half of the poem, the first 4 lines. So line 1 describes how the speaker interacted with the learned astronomer, right? So we know about how the apostrophe here is taking the place of the E. So this word is learned, which means like educated. And what is taking place between the speaker and the astronomer? What is going on here? Pause me and answer. The following line describes the scene more completely. When I sitting heard the astronomer where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room. What words appear in this line that don't appear in the poem's first line? Pause me and answer. Yes, sitting. So now we understand more that he's in a lecture, the astronomer is lecturing or talking. And what word appears in the first line that's left out here? When I sitting heard the astronomer, when I heard the learned astronomer. So here we have learned, and here we just have astronomer. Okay, so why would the speaker leave out that word as he's pairing up the roles of the speaker and the astronomer. Also notice that the astronomer lectured based on what the poem's speaker is doing. You could think about a teacher and students, a person giving information. The speaker gets much applause for his lecture. Based on those words, how do most listeners probably feel about the speaker's lecture? Everybody's clapping, right? Pause me and answer what you think. Okay, look back at the beginning of the poem. The speaker hears the astronomer, but he sees many other things. Name what he sees in lines 2 and 3. Please pause me and do that. Whitman repeats the word when a great deal. Where does the word when appear in these lines? When I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs figures were arranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I, sitting, heard the astronomer where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room. So remember how we said that repeating a word in a poem, particularly in the first line of a poem, that's called anaphora. Say it with me. Anaphora, very good. And that's a poetic device that's adding emphasis to that thought, idea, or emotion. So there's a purpose in using anaphora. What does the speaker here seem to be stressing by repeating the word when? Give a reason based on the poem that helps explain your answer. Pause me here. All right, so maybe you're thinking about the content and the form, stressing that he heard and saw a lot of things. When I heard this, when I saw this, right? Kind of emphasizing the things that he heard and saw. So the speaker is remembering when he went to an astronomy lecture and was bombarded with a lot of information. He's also repeating certain words. It's important to note that this is what the speaker tells us about his experience. The speaker doesn't exactly tell us how he feels. We can use the poem's clues to consider how the speaker might feel in this situation. Okay, very good. We have another video, and this one is similar, but it has more sound to it. So let's see if we can pull that one up.
When I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures, were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I, sitting, heard the astronomer where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room.
How did watching the video with those lines at the same time, how did that show what the speaker describes? Pause me and talk about it. So we're linking the images and the words together. Do you think the hand is the astronomer's as he's explaining it? Or maybe those are the astronomer's proofs and figures in the video? Based on the images in the video and the anaphora in these lines, how do you think the speaker might feel about the lecture? Give details from the poem or video to explain why you think he feels that way. Pause me now. All right, maybe he's bored or unhappy. Yeah, maybe the anaphora or the fact, maybe that he's overwhelmed. Maybe he's trying to sort it out. Okay, let's see. All right. Now we're going to look at the whole poem, and you also have it on your book in page 27. Let's read the whole thing now. When I Heard the Learned Astronomer by Walt Whitman. When I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I, sitting, heard the astronomer where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room, how soon, unaccountable, I became tired and sick, till rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself in the mystical, moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars. Let's read it one more time. When I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I sitting heard the astronomer where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room, how soon unaccountable I became tired and sick, till rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself in the mystical, moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars. All right. Now we have some more of the poem, right? Okay, let's go to 3.1 in your book, and that's 28 and 29 and 30. So don't forget, there's 3 pages this time. It's actually 10 questions, and things are described to you by lines. Remember, the lines are numbered, so that could help you. And of course, you can always use your glossary or the poem or your book. Kuma Chris, could you please set a timer for 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and go over it, and pause me here. Thanks for your hard work. All right, write down the first word of lines 5 through 8. How, till, in, looked. How do these opening words differ from the opening words of lines 1 through 4? Right? So lines 1 through 4, in lines 1 to 4, the words were all when. These words are not when. Something like that? Okay. Check your work. If you didn't write that, then fix it up and make sure you have something like that written down. Yes. In line 5, the speaker describes his feelings at the lecture. What words does he use to describe how he started to feel? He said he started to feel tired and sick. Tired and sick. Okay, so get that written down in a sentence because we answer our questions in sentences. Earlier in the discussion, we predicted how the speaker might feel at the lecture. What clues did you use from the poem that helped you make your prediction? I don't know. I don't remember us making a prediction about how he might feel. Maybe we did. So you answer whatever you felt then. What clues did you use from the poem that helped you make this prediction? He seemed bored. He was calling the professor a learned professor and then not a learned professor. He was sitting. He was shown, right? Maybe you're going to talk about some of the words in the poem. And reminder, anaphora is a repetition of certain words at the beginning of lines of the poem. Poets use anaphora for lots of reasons, including to add emphasis to their ideas. So not in the entire poem, right? Because in this poem, it's only in the first 4 lines. Okay. Number 5, according to line 6, what did the speaker do as a result of these feelings? So in line 6, use the words from the poem in your answer. Rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself were the words from the poem. So maybe you wrote, he was rising and gliding out. I wandered off by myself. And he sure does use this taking out the E and putting in the apostrophe quite a bit. I think it was something that people did more in the 19th century and the 1800s that they don't do now. We don't see that these days, do we? Okay. What did he do? I think this means he left the lecture, right? Okay, so don't forget to make sure you answer the whole question. Number 6, paraphrase your answer from question 5 by putting the poem's words into your own words. Okay, so paraphrase, putting it into our own words. He got up and went outside. Something like that. What does the speaker do in lines 7 and 8? He goes out into the night and looks at the stars himself, right? He went outside and looked at the stars instead of having someone explain it to him, right? So instead of looking at chocolate, he's eating chocolate. Instead of listening to someone talk about astronomy, he's looking at the stars himself. Starting with line 5, the poem no longer uses anaphora and instead begins each line with a different word. We know that in lines 1 through 4, the speaker is starting to feel sick and tired. Why might someone who feels sick and tired use the same words over and over? Okay, so you're feeling sick and tired. So he uses, oh, I see. He's feeling sick and tired in the beginning. And then when he leaves, he's using new words because he's not feeling so sick and tired anymore, right? Did you notice that? Okay, well, I don't know what I did there. Let's see if we can get back. There we go. He was feeling sick and tired at the beginning. So emphasized this, or was too lazy to think of other words. I don't know. He's trying to show that he's tired. Then when he got outside, he was refreshed and used new words. I don't know. Something like that is your opinion. So as long as you wrote something that makes sense, make sure you have something there. Based on the variety of words used to start lines 5 through 8, how do you think the speaker might feel by the end of the poem? Give a reason for your answer. So maybe you said, by the end of the poem, the speaker is refreshed. Something like that, right? I put some of that up here too. So based on the poem, do you think this speaker would rather hear someone describe his favorite food or eat his favorite food? I think he would like to eat his favorite food since the lecture was boring him. Something like that. Okay, to paraphrase someone's writing or speech, you express the meaning in different words. When you paraphrase, you change the words without changing the main idea. Very good. And if you don't have this written down, if you didn't get to finish, hopefully you paused me and got that taken care of. So make sure that you have everything filled in. And if you need help, you can get it, or you can ask someone to copy theirs. Oh, right. And we're going to go on to writing about it. So we're going to write anaphora poems. It's exciting. And you're in the independent writing section of your poetry journal. So you're on page 31. Make sure you're there. And I want you to think about a time in your past when something made you feel bored and then a change happened that made things more interesting. Maybe you were waiting at the doctor's office until you could get the ice cream your parents promised you. Or maybe you had to clean your room before you could go play with your friends. Make sure to think of a time when you remember feeling bored, but then you stopped feeling bored as something you liked happened. Okay? So think about where you were. What were the people around you doing? What did you hear, see, taste, touch, and smell? How long did it feel like you were there? All right. And let's pause and do that. And then we'll come back and start working on our poems. All right. Very good. Okay. So now that you have all those parts done, you're going to come back to the next part. Now that you've thought about the situation and remembered what it was like, use your answers to the question on the previous page to write a poem like Whitman's. On each line that starts with when, the when is already there for you, right? Write a description of the scene connected to each of your answers above. You might need to rearrange some words from your answers to ensure the lines make sense. We call that revision or changing your writing. Revision is a great technique that can help you make your writing better. After you write 4 when lines to describe the situation you were in, compose 4 more lines to describe how your situation changed or what helped end your boredom. You may start those lines with any word you like as long as you don't use when. So 4 when lines and then 4 lines with the new situation. Okay, very good. And just like always, when you're finished, if you have time to share and being very kind and helpful to each other would be great and fabulous. Thank you for your great attention. I appreciate you. Aloha.